Welcome to New Detroit's Town Hall. I'm Marshall Favors, Director of Community Engagement for New Detroit. New Detroit is a coalition of leaders working to achieve racial understanding and racial equity in metropolitan Detroit. To learn more about our organization or to donate, you can visit us at newdetroit.org. Well, I am so excited about this town hall. Our topic is young leaders' perspectives on racial and social justice. And it's a conversation with activists and organizers about racial and social justice based on the work and organizations that they're involved in. So to assist me in this conversation, I would like to introduce my dynamic moderator, co-moderator, Sharia Ayers, community advocate, educator, counselor, entrepreneur, and student are just a few titles associated with Sharia. And now she's the Director of Events and Growth Membership for Black Leaders Detroit, a funding source for small Black-led businesses that operate in the city. Welcome, Sharia.
Thanks for having me. All right, well, let's get into it. I am going to introduce our panelists. First, we have Nicholas D. Barnes. Nicholas D. Barnes is a graduate of Michigan State University, go green, and a political consultant working in Detroit. He focuses on candidate advisory, voter education, and digital marketing in the political sphere. Next, we have Shakia L. Ballard. Shakia is a mental health entrepreneur, community advocate, and limited license clinical social worker who provides clinical therapy to adolescents and adults of all ages with an emphasis on goal-oriented and solution-focused interventions. And lastly, we have James Skrill Everhart Jr. James Skrill Everhart Jr.'s passion for people leads him to create a prominent program called Black to Reality, a program developed to build character and social awareness among the youth in schools. Community visioneer at Force, faithfully organizing resources for community empowerment in Detroit, a culmination of interfaith, grassroots, and public sector leaders committed to having hard conversations about complex community issues, pushing boundaries, and generating creative, justice-oriented solutions. So, welcome our panelists. You all want to say hello? All right. So thank you for being here. And Marshall, we'll start with you with the first question.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here. So we heard a little bit about each of you from those introductions from Sharia. And I'd like you to tell our audience a bit about the work that you do from your perspective and what you're engaged in and how it relates to racial and social justice. And we're going to start with you, Nicholas.
Okay, hey, first off, thank you for having me tonight. In my line of work as a political consultant, racial and social justice is a big part of what I do. In the past, I worked with various programs, especially advising candidates, helping them understand issues on a younger level and connecting with voters in different places. Also focusing on their digital media and making sure that the messages that they create are tailored to the voters that they're trying to reach in the areas and districts that they're focusing in, to make sure that they're aligned with the communities and making sure that the people are getting the message that is best fit for them. I'm really passionate about social justice in my own life. I'm a big fan of educating the people around me and helping them get set up with voting and giving them voter guides and making sure that people are in the know when it comes to voting, because voter ignorance is a big thing that plagues a lot of us. And I really work in my line of work. In my line of work, I put big emphasis on making sure that people get the information they need and the resources that they need to be the best voters they can be.
Thank you so much. Shakia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me again. So along the lines of my work, I'm in the mental health field. So I've been a therapist for about 3 years. And so one of the things that's really important to me in terms of social justice is debunking the mental health myths in the Black community, especially with men and women, and just making sure that our community has accessible, resources to insurance and to mental health as well.
Thank you for that. Skrill, what do you have to say?
Peace. Appreciate you all having me. doing the work with enforcing side of the social justice, even me growing up, racial justice and social justice has been something that's being prominent, growing up in white spaces. But moving to Detroit took a different toll on my perspective, especially during these coming years of this transition of the migration back of the white spaces coming back into the city of Detroit. But the access to opportunities and resources within inside of our communities that we don't have is a big push to force reimagining what Detroit looks like as a freer and safer for those who have been here, been living in Detroit and still reside. So, a lot of my spaces is obtaining those resources, connecting the dots with those who are doing the work within inside of the community, and building more of a collaboration over competition type of feel, where we're not competing over the scarce resources that we think that are scarce, and creating bigger resources for us to utilize to change the situations and circumstances of these issues inside of our community.
All right. Thank you for that. And a little bit about how your work relates to social justice. And so let me go back. I want to talk to Nick a little bit about voter ignorance. So I have questions for the three of you, but you mentioned voter ignorance, and I would like to tap into how you think that plays a role in regards to racial and social justice. Like, can you tell us a little bit more about the whole civic engagement part and making sure we move towards like racial and social justice, and elaborate on the voter ignorance?
So voter ignorance is a big thing I feel like plagues a lot of people, especially in our age group. Just to use an example, like in the last election, a lot of people didn't even know about the back of their ballots and candidates back there. And on the back of those ballots are our proposals, our school board, circuit court judges. So that plays a big part on racial justice, because if we don't know what candidates that we're voting for, the people that we're nominating, we kind of just get what we got. And as we see in the past, a lot of these people don't have our best interests. So voter ignorance plays a big part because it allows people that don't have our best interests to slip through the cracks and really just take advantage of the popularity contest that politics can be sometimes by just plastering their name all over the place and just hoping that when people get to the ballot, instead of knowing what issues they stand on, they kind of just recognize their name and face and kind of prey on that. So I feel like a big thing in voter ignorance is educating people and letting people know that you have to know your whole ballot, because it's deeper than just voting your party ticket. The most important elections are typically on the back of the ballot, and they put those on the back of the ballot because a lot of us don't typically look down the ballot or really look into the circuit court judges or the school boards or the commissioners in our communities. And those are things that more directly affect us more in our communities than, let's say, some of the bigger elections like the governor and the AG, like your school board, are the people that, our brothers and sisters go to these neighborhood schools. So those are some of the more important elections, because those are the things that touches us every day compared to the big box elections that we typically see all the ads and media for.
Now, Nick, I have a follow-up question also. And anyone can feel free to jump in as well, because this is an open dialogue with everyone. And I know that at New Detroit, we have town halls to help with education and to try to get the word out when it comes to voting and different issues that are facing the community. But what do you think are some of the best ways for folks to get the information? Because like I said, we do town halls, and I mean, I know you can Google anything like today, but if you wanted to have a more personal experience and to really find out more information about like issues and candidates and things like that, what would you suggest?
This one for me. You want me to keep going?
Sure.
I would say the best way to reach people at this point in time were to go into their spaces rather than just, not saying lecturing to people all the time, but typically younger kids, I'm saying younger kids like I'm not young, but as younger as people, a lot of us see these things, but not saying they necessarily pique our interests, but these are not the kind of spaces that we want to interact with politicians or other people with sometimes, because sometimes they may be a little too formal. Social media is a big thing. I would say making messages that are more in that younger person's language. Like, you don't want it to feel like cringy and lame, but you have to understand like what type of dialogue should I use? Because in certain areas, a tailored message might not reach this person because of the language you're using. So I think the biggest thing is to just get more personal with kids and showing them the value that they have, rather than just kind of, sometimes I'm a part of it too, sometimes just having spaces for them to go to rather than just attacking them, like, pulling up to that function and going to hang out with kids. Like, it may not go against the grain, but like, pop into that party that somebody's selling tickets to and go chop it up. Like, don't necessarily come to talk about issues. People want to know a person. So I feel like getting that humanistic aspect and that realm of voting would definitely show great results, especially with younger kids, because people just want to feel like humans at the end of the day, rather than just like, hey, this is what you need to know. People just want to be understood on a fundamental personal level.
That's quite interesting. I don't know about y'all, but I'm not pulling up to no party to talk about politics.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, but
but no, I mean, I do agree with you, just because I also have a background in education, so I definitely agree. Like, you have to meet people where they are so they can receive the information. But to your point as well, I think it's also, I thought that was very good that you mentioned just even understanding how to go through a ballot properly, because they teach civics and economics, which is two of the most important subjects in social studies, in 10th grade for half a year. So you got to think 2 years later, of course, don't nobody remember that. And they don't even really discuss it in the curriculum. So thank you for hitting on that. But I do want to move to Shakia. And I also have a question for you too, Skrill. You talked about the stigmas around mental health in our community. And like, when we talk about racial and social justice, we see issues and things occurring because a lot of us just don't even understand mental health and what that looks like. So I guess from an advocacy standpoint, I would like you to shed a little bit more light on how people can get more involved with practicing empathy and what that looks like, and just even highlighting some of those stigmas, because I know you do the work. Like, you'll have a table, you give information, you've done workshops, like you've done a lot of different things. So just elaborate on that for us, please.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, and I think Nicholas, you kind of touched on it a little bit, is that humanistic aspect, right? So I think a lot of times, specifically like in the Black community, anytime we talk about mental health or even talking about a problem, the first thing that comes to mind is like, well, you don't talk about anything that's outside of the home, right? Your feelings and your emotions, you kind of have to shut that down and suppress it. And that's where a lot of the social issues kind of come in, anything that you go through in life as far as like our space is something that you don't talk about outside of your home. And when you do talk about those problems or those concerns outside of your home, then you can be judged, right? Or you can be crucified for, any old type of thing. And so I think with mental health, it's just becoming more, how can I say this? Like, people are understanding it more, especially the millennial generation, because a lot of the symptoms that many of us have or did have was already there, right? So you can have a child in the 10th grade having a panic attack, always feeling nervous, always feeling anxious, always feeling on edge, but don't know what that is. Or you can have another kid who may be a Black male who's maybe more emotional, right? Always crying, we don't know what that is. And then you get older and then you realize like, oh, hey, like, no, I didn't have a name for it, but I was going through depression. I was going through anxiety. Or the other common thing is I was going through post-traumatic symptoms and things of that nature. It's just back then we didn't really have a name for it in the Black community. So I think for me, it's really debunking those myths. And I think from my understanding as a clinical therapist, when I have clients that come into my office, it's just being transparent, being vocal, making them feel like at the end of the day, no matter what it is that you're going through, you are a human first at the end, of the day. People come in for racial concerns, people come in for transgender, LGBT community concerns. So it's not always depression, it's not always anxiety, it's not always something that's related to mental health. It can be just life stressors in general. And I think for me, I just want people to understand that it's okay to talk to somebody that may not be a family member, that may not be a friend, where you can get more information and just not be judged for whatever it is that you are continuously going through in your life or whatnot.
That's real. We did used to have a name for it. It was just called bad. Like
Right. Or little Johnny, no, that's true though. Or little
they be
Johnny,
like,
they're
oh, they
just,
crying again. They bad. Sit over there.
they're just bad kids. And a lot of the time your environment is everything. And so whatever we learned today, you learned it from someone else. So I always like to use this phrase, like, a child learn a certain behavior. A child don't know their ABCs. They don't just wake up one day and like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Somebody had to teach them their ABCs, right? And so with certain behaviors comes along certain emotions. It's just you really don't understand what it is until you get older. Like, we can sit back and look at trauma. Most Black people have trauma. It's an unfortunate thing to say, but most Black people have trauma at a very young age and don't even realize they have trauma until they're 25, 26 years old, and they're going into the world recognizing, like, I don't know how to deal or cope with certain things. Or once again, why am I so angry all the time? Well, it's something that happened in your childhood that could have potentially triggered you to have this typical, behavior.
Marshall, did you have a question before I keep going?
Absolutely. Shakia, I wanted to follow up with something that's like kind of near and dear to our work at New Detroit. And just recently, you're a mental health specialist, and you talked about trauma, and racism was declared a mental health crisis in the United
Yes.
States, right? And a lot of times I know that I lead a lot of conversations on race. And what I found out is that folks really, some people didn't have like a space and a place or a forum to talk about issues like related to race. And sometimes they were sharing like these stories related to like their life and how racism has impacted them. And they've shared those stories like for the first time. And so other than like conversations like on race, because some people are just not public like that, right? I'm not going to
Yeah.
go, and even if I do want to express something, I may not do it publicly in an open space, even though that helps some people. What are some things like folks can do like on a personal level to deal with kind of like the racial trauma that they may be experiencing in their life?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing that comes to my mind, because social media plays a huge part of it, like, we have to take a step back from social media at times. And I say that because your mind is absorbing so many things on a constant basis. A lot of these racial injustice things that are happening across the world, we are finding out through social media, and we're constantly seeing it. We're constantly, hearing about it. And it's an unfortunate situation. But when you're constantly seeing it and you're constantly hearing about it, that does something to your mind, that does something to your body, that does something to your spirit. So I always tell people, like, it's okay to just take a step back and acknowledge how you feel in those moments and just cope with your emotions in those moments, as well. Because not only do we have our own personal struggles going on, we have to deal with racial injustices as well. So I think the biggest thing is taking a step back exploring your emotions, exploring yourself identity, exploring your race, you know, as a whole, understanding who it is that you are, who it is that you're not, what it is that you stand for, and what it is that you don't stand for, and be authentic with that as it relates to racism. And the biggest thing for me when people come in with concerns like that, that revolves around racism and self identity, is owning your truth.
Mm,
We all have a truth
yeah.
at the end of the day. And I think that's the biggest thing that any human can do or give to themselves, is owning their truth and being okay to walk in their truth.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Mm.
Shreya, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Walking in your truth, because but I still think that's wild that racism was declared a mental health crisis. Like,
Yes.
I'm sorry, like, is that in the DSM? Like, I don't know, whatever. It's
Probably
environment,
not. I mean,
you know.
probably not.
But
It could be. It could be, but
I'm just
I mean,
saying,
I don't
like,
know.
is it a mental health crisis for us or them, or
Yeah,
how
I
are we defining
mean,
this? I don't know, but good times. The Skrill. What stood out with what you were saying was reimagining Detroit. So what I want to know from you, as well as Nicholas and Shakia, because you all have very unique perspectives in your fields of work. So you can answer after Skrill though. But Skrill, I would like to know, what would a Detroit utopia look like in your opinion?
Oh, that's a man. That's a now this going into philosophy, huh?
I
But
mean, you just said reimagining it, so let's get into it.
yeah. So reimagining the landscape of Detroit now is learning from our past, and building upon what was already built within inside of our past. And it's really diving into the aspects of what are we investing majority inside of the city of Detroit. I agree with each of our panelists. Mental health, ACEs. I'm not a mental health professionalist, but I'm definitely an advocate. And reimagining investments in the city of Detroit around mental health, direct services, giving those services, just like Nicholas was saying, you have to go directly to the people. We're in a day of age still inside of our city where even our elected officials still wait for community to come to them with their issues. And we need our administration, we need each and everybody that's doing services that, paid services that we are paying out of taxpayer dollars, to come down to the streets, to the neighborhoods, the doors, and provide those services that we are paying for without us having to ask for something when we are in a state of fighting. We are in a state of trying to figure things out, and we don't know which numbers to call. We don't even have time to evaluate which numbers that we need to call. And we are in a state of where we need someone to come to our door and knock on the door and say, these are the resources that we have available within inside of our services. So creating this utopia of Detroit coming to fruition, per se, let's say that, is really getting our youth involved. With ACEs, that's going down to the childhood. Our childhood experience outweighs everything inside of our adult life. Just like Ms. Ballard was saying, like, these experiences, we have to get our younger generation more involved earlier and throughout every last process, rather than waiting till we are inside of our adult or teenage years to try to make these decisions and really create curriculums, create certain experiences that are tailored towards their particular age group. And that was something, I felt also when here about getting voting involved in politicians or elected officials or whoever that's inside of that process coming to the space. Don't come to the space with your hat on as an elected official, come to the space as your human form. Let me know who you are as an individual, because I don't need you to overpromise me what you're looking to do. I need you to effectively accomplish in small increments what we are trying to change in a large scale. So that's the future of what I see Detroit becoming, us taking the baby steps together with the babies and having them create the future, because we say we're looking for the future and creating the future, but if we truly talking about that, we're truly talking about the next generation, the generation that might not even be tuned in to this town hall discussion, and prepping them and getting them more involved inside of the processes. I'm a big Sean fan. And when he was talking about he didn't really learn as much as he learned in life, he should have learned in school, even being a Cass Tech graduate. That's a great school in the city of Detroit. But even life skills need to be inside of our educational system. We need to have stores where we're learning how to spend our money, and that's teaching math. We need to have science and home ec that's teaching you how to cook the nutritional way to eat, to live inside of our community, that teach you measurements. We need to just reimagine this whole thing. And I think we have a great opportunity in the city of Detroit, because the city of Detroit is predominantly Black. It's still a majority. We just have to come together and get our, connect our resources and our education together to make sure that we are empowering those who are coming after us that looks like us inside of the Blackest city in America.
That's fair. I like what you were saying, like taking baby steps with the babies. We need to make a shirt, maybe. Say, no, I'm kidding. But no, I think that's really, all three of you all hit on the educational aspect of things. And, to me, I feel like somebody need to write a bill so we could push it or hold our people accountable. But nonetheless, I'd like to hear from Nicholas and Shakia, like, how do you all envision the Detroit utopia from your professional background?
I think for me, it goes back to what Surreal was saying. Like, it starts with the kids. At the end of the day, it starts with adults listening, because a lot of times adults are just very authoritative, and it's just like, you do this and you do that, and it's like, okay, but kids, teens, they have a voice, they have opinions, and their voice and their opinions matters. And so if we want the generation to take over, we have to listen to them, provide some empathy, provide some understanding, along with some guidance. At the end of the day, every generation is going to have a different experience.
That's right.
So our experience can't be their experience, or our experience, we can't push that on to them, because things are constantly changing every single day. And so I think with things changing every single day, we all have to have an open mind and be able to adjust, is really what it is. You have to be able to adjust the new people, right? Different mindsets at the end of the day.
For me, a Detroit utopia, I've been sitting here thinking about that question, thinking about how I wanted to answer it. For me, to simplify it and just go from there, Detroit utopia for me is about representation, and representation of the real Detroit and the people that live there. As you can see, I live in the Lower East Side near Indian Village, and I have been seeing like a lot of whites move back into my community. And one thing I have seen is that our representatives in these communities aren't Black people. And when you pull the population numbers of these communities, they're still 70–80% Black. So for me, a Detroit utopia is getting people a part of the system, like they are saying, from a young age, and getting them to know this is how the system works and this is how the system can work for you. Because if we can't tackle the kids, like they're saying, on that fundamental level and give them those resources, this Detroit utopia that we talk about will be a dream, because we will lose our power and resources in neighborhoods, honestly, through not taking part in these systems, because as we see, they will come in and they will push us out. And throughout that representation and having those people in those positions of power, those community leaders, and that next generation that's willing to pick up that fight, I think is going to be a big part in getting that Detroit utopia. Like, there should be no reason why we shouldn't have a Black mayor in the Blackest city in America. So I think that Detroit utopia for me is about having representation to make sure that the culture that we have in Detroit and the people that Detroit have fostered through everything from us taking over the city after the riot and making Detroit the city it is today are protected, and that culture and those people and those kids are fostered to take Detroit to the next level. So for me, Utopia Detroit is about representation of the real Detroit, and that's the Black communities, the younger kids in the school system, the younger kids that, you know, want to get involved but just don't know. So having that representation and access to resources and having cool, level-headed, and, you know, selfless people involved in that process will get us towards that utopia. So that's pretty much it for me. Having representation and access to resources would be my ultimate Detroit utopia.
Yeah, you definitely hit on some pertinent issues, you know. And I know we don't want to delve too deep into that. Marshall, did you have another question?
I actually have a question for you, because
okay.
when we talk about resources, and everyone has brought up resources, and Nick, you brought them up as well. I just love that Black Leaders Detroit, the focus, your mission, part of that, you know, achieving equity, and has to be around businesses, right?
Mhm.
And resources for businesses, and making sure that we're feeding Black and BIPOC, you know,
Just Black.
organizations and businesses, right? So how do you think that Black Leaders Detroit is helping to achieve economic equity when it comes to Black businesses in Detroit?
So thank you for asking. But with what we do with Black Leaders Detroit is that we are trying to do a culture shift by informing our people in action on how we can build an economic ecosystem. So what we're doing is, to be honest, it's nothing new, because our people historically have always relied on each other in regards to providing sources of economics as well as engaging the community. But what we do is our members, and I can't remember, I think you remember. But anyway, so our members contribute or invest rather $4 a month, and we take that money and put it towards grants and loans for Black entrepreneurs, because all of it is cyclical. So to your point, like if Black entrepreneurs are having or getting money rather, then they're going to hire Black people. Those Black people are going to be able to feed their families, and then they're going to be able to shop at these businesses in the community that's going to stimulate the economy. You know, so, and then if the economy is stimulated, then people are going to want to live there and stay there and patronize the people in that area. So it all goes together. But what we do is simply provide a guide for people of a like mind, you know, whether they are Black or not. So people who are about equity in general, we act as a guide to help them invest and pour back into Detroit's economy by providing the resources and financial resources, as well as doing community events to bring people together. So that's how we're practicing equity and promoting racial and social justice, because at the end of the day, most of the issues we have come back to money. I mean, when it comes to the political aspect, it's about the money. When it comes to dealing with issues of racism, I mean, Black people were a source of economics. Like, it was never about the humanistic aspect. It was about the money, you know. And then even when you think about the mental health fields, at the end of the day, we got the drugs, we push it out. It's about the money. Those bodies fill those institutions, and y'all know what type of institutions I'm talking about. So it's all cyclical. So the thing is, we provide grants and loans based on collective economics from our members. So that's how we practice equity.
Right, it's all connected. I want to open it up to any of our panelists to see if anyone has a follow-up question or comment for each other.
I do have a comment, because I agree with all the panelists, moderators, co-moderator, around our issues, and I think that what we need to also start doing is putting things in motion. We have a lot of discussions, and sometimes we use our discussions more than our actual feet and energy to move things forward. So I definitely take my hat off to everyone on the call that is putting their boots on the ground and moving things forward, and not just talking the talk, but actually walking the walk of it. And economics is extremely big within side of re-envisioning and moving not just Detroit forward, but the nation, the world. How do we equip Detroit, which is the mechanism, the engine, the motor, with the motor city? How do we move the whole economic standpoint of the Black economic base here also? From Detroit for a national lens.
Any one of our panelists want to chime in on that question?
This call broke up on my side. Can you repeat the question?
The ending portion, it did say, my internet did say unstable. So the ending portion was just basically saying, how do we move as the city of Detroit? We are the Blackest city in America, and I do have a vision for this also, but I want to hear from the panelists around this. How do we move our economic base with us knowing, and we always say we are the Blackest city in America? How do we move economics, what Ms. Ayers was speaking about, moving forward for national? No longer us just looking at the city of Detroit, but we have to exemplify excellence for a national lens of individuals that are us, that are Black, right? And this is not just local, not just nationally, but also internationally. The world looks at Detroit and knows that we are the Blackest city in America. So how do we move that economical standpoint with inside of Detroit to make a change globally, basically?
I think for me, coming from a mental health perspective, without getting too personal, I think creating the opportunity, right? Creating opportunities for Black people, and I'm speaking specifically for mental health and social work specifically. I'm not speaking upon no field, so let me just clarify that. But I believe in having more Black representation in those spaces, right? Because a lot of times when you're looking at mental health specifically, you have more white people in those spaces, which makes it not relatable for a Black person to see a white person when there is nothing that you can relate to in my life, right? So I think it's about representation. I think it's about creating access for specifically mental health, because there are a lot of politics and a lot of behind the scenes that goes into that as well. So if there is not any type of, if there's no access, then we're at a standstill. So it's really about continuously promoting, advocating, putting resources out there. I know we talk about like at the end of the day, it's about the money, which is all true about the money, but how can we make that money accessible to the community and make it accessible to it being eventually a nationwide thing? But I think a lot of those times when we have those conversations, truth be told, we got to get Black people in those higher positions. That's that's the first thing. Is if we can't get Black people in those higher positions, kind of like what Nicholas said, we're the blackest city, we have a white mayor. So if we can't get into those positions, once again, it's a standstill. So it goes back to, we have to break down those barriers to get into those higher positions, because once we get into those higher positions, then what can we do? We continuously can bring Black people on, and Black people can do the same for the younger generation and continuously bring Black people on. So that's, I don't want to get too personal, because I would give a whole ram about how I feel, but that's just my intake on it from mental health and the social work perspective specifically.
I think for me, it's about, on an economic standpoint, getting Detroit to be that global economic powerhouse, I guess, like you're saying. I think it's about starting with education and showing kids the power of the dollar, and showing how the power of the dollar can bleed over into other aspects of your life. Like teaching a kid how to invest and showing them how their money grows over the course of 10 years will not only show them that if they put in the work, they will see benefits, and teaching them that fundamental investment of investing $1 will show them like, hey, if we want to become the city that we want to become, it's going to take us 15 years. And from previous examples, if you grow something over 15 years and you nurture it and take care of it, it should reap good results. And when I say the power of the dollar, that's getting, I would say, more wealthier Black retention into the city. So a lot of us do have to be in these higher positions, and we do have to, even if we, quote unquote, have a bag, we have to go live in these communities that we might not see as, unfavorable, or we worked hard to get out of, because the way to get value back in Detroit is to put value into it. So just having more of us in these younger generations that are getting into these higher places, being able to be open to moving back into our communities and putting our dollar back into our communities, and just showing kids that there's a different way, because we want people in these valuable and high positions, but when a lot of us walk out our front door, we don't see nobody in these positions. So it's about putting people in the community and getting those examples that kids can interact with on a daily example, because if we want a kid to be a doctor, we can't expect him to be a doctor if he walks outside of his house and nobody on his block is a doctor. So we got to start having people move back in and showing kids the investment that, it's a long process for us, unfortunately. If it comes fast, that'd be great. But I would say just being the example and just investment is the biggest thing to get Detroit there. It's something that's going to take a long time period, but we have to start becoming those examples in these areas of the cities that we know are the weakest, and start pulling people up with us, or even just showing them that it's a different way out there.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Well, I agree with what everyone has said. And I think definitely, if it's a conversation, it's a conversation about economics. I think that, also it's about, collective power and collective action, right? So if you have these young people and you're teaching them how to invest, but also just as communities, right? And like you said, Skrill, it can't just be local, but it has to be statewide, has to be nationwide, it has to be internationally, right? I always say that I feel like we underutilize like our collective power that we have, whether it's circulating our dollars or with voting and making sure that we have that participation. And for me, even like with the city of Detroit, no matter like who's in office, no matter what the race of that person is, everyone has to be connected. Like you said, this is the blackest city in America, and that the person has to represent the voice, the people, the issues, and really be in tune with and what the folks in Detroit represent and what they want. But for me, like I said, it has to be a collective effort. A lot of things that I think that we do too much in silos, and a lot of times there are resources, and Sharia, you mentioned this about resources and having resources, and Shakia, you did as well, about tapping into those resources, creating opportunities, but creating opportunities in a way, I feel like if we're connected and using our resources and human capital in a more connected way. So those are my thoughts on it. And Sharia, I'm going to turn it over to you to close us out with the last question.
Okay. I'm sorry. I just had to say one last thing in regards to that. I mean,
Oh,
first
no,
off,
go ahead, feel free.
yeah, I'm sorry, because I ain't trying to go over time either, for real. And I know we only got a few more minutes. But real quick to your question, Skrill, which was a great question. I think you all hit on a lot of things that I was going to also say about collective power. And then with Nicholas, you were talking about the geopolitical power and leveraging that. And then Kia, you were hitting on just even the understanding piece of how we move forward and what that looks like. So, shout out to y'all for that. And I would definitely say to your question, though, Skrill, is that we need to stop trying to reinvent the wheel. Like historically, our people have done this. So prime example, like with the Montgomery bus boycott, they had a system. Everybody knew their role. They had the money backed up to bail people out of jail. The young people were the ones on the front lines getting hosed and everything like that, because they knew that the parents had to still hold it down. People were carpooling, raising money, working together. And the whole world learned about one city, and that one city shut down their economic system in regards to the buses. So it all worked together. And then not only in Montgomery, the Housewives League of Detroit, during the 1930s, which was the Great Depression and the worst economic time period in our history, they secured 75,000 jobs for African Americans. And they went to various merchants in the city. And if they didn't meet the 3 criteria, which was to buy Black, support Black businesses, or patronize Black professionals, they wouldn't shop there. And they collectively work together. So the whole thing is like, we already got the tools. We just have to use them in the present day. And I think the biggest thing is that, to everybody's point, we don't know enough to even implement the stuff that we're talking about, because people already had a formula that worked. And we're keep trying to do something different, and it just don't have to be that way. So I agree with y'all, but I think also we need to be just pulling from the stuff we've already done and we know was effective. All right, so to wrap it all up, because we got a few minutes, what do you all plan to do to stay engaged in racial and social justice?
I think for me, I'm going to continue to do what I've been doing, and that is when I hear about community events, continuously sitting at these tables, continuously having these conversations, continuously sitting on these panels, presenting at workshops, whether it is for parents or students or teachers, because that is something that I do, and just figuring out ways to continuously make mental health accessible to all Black people, no matter their age, no matter anything. And that's what I'm going to continue to do.
And Shakia being modest, she like created a whole journal and everything.
Oh my
That's got
God.
like writing prompts. I'm just saying, let me, toot your own horn. But again, that's fine. All right, Skrill, let's hear from you. What do you plan to do?
I plan to continue to keep doing my advocacy piece with Inside of Force, making sure that those who I'm connected into community, bringing them in with inside of the space that they're traditionally not involved in, and letting them know their true power of who they are with inside of their community. And also not just their community, inside of the political aspects of changing our policies and circumstances and structures. So I would definitely continue doing that, and advocating for those who don't traditionally get those resources. So right now, you know, we do a lot of CVI, community violence intervention work with directly impacted individuals, and obtaining this type of field and language, we're not trying, actually, I got to take that out of our vocabulary. Everything that we spoke about as a collective today, we are already doing it. So we're going to continue to professionalize something that isn't professionalized within inside of our community, and nationally is professionalized in certain areas, but within inside of our community, we have not yet professionalized criteria or jobs that fits the actual day-to-day individual that, you know, probably did some things and served their time. Now they're out and they can't get a job in the quote unquote professional world. And now we're creating roles and responsibilities that they can be professionalized and actually give solutions and actually cause impact, true impact within inside of their community by giving back, doing community violence. So this is something that I will continuously doing, and also networking. So I definitely want to reach out to everyone that was on this panel today and continue to network, so that way we can come up with the solutions. But between the solutions that we come up with, let's put a form of action behind it.
And again, he being modest too, because you actually make community events, like create them for people to come about and do what we're doing right now. But shout out to you for that. All right, Nick, let's hear from you.
I would say going forward, I'll keep working keep pushing emphasis on voter education and working that sphere. I know that we have this little thing called a presidential race coming up very soon. So probably in the next year, I'll probably definitely be on the ground connecting with different community leaders and talking to people to see, you know, what's the best approach for us going forward to make sure that we get the foothold that we're looking for and understanding our power in this upcoming presidential election. So I'll just say keep working the voter education sphere, just keeping my ears to the streets and just seeing what the people are talking about and see how I can be an advocate of change and keep making sure that the right message gets to the right people.
Yeah, and I would just suggest too, based on the way I met you, Nicholas, make sure you also working with these politicians, because I met him when he was with a political official. He was like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. Like, let's go over here. Like, so, because that's very important. Like, if your hand or your pulse is on them, keep that up too. So,
Definitely.
Right. Like, get them together. All right. But thank you, Marshall. And I'll turn it over to you. Thank you, Nick, Kia, and Skrill. This is great.
Oh my goodness. And we could have this conversation, I know, for even another hour, but our time was short, and I couldn't thank you all enough for this robust conversation. Just want to thank everyone that joined us: Sharia Ayers, Nicholas Barnes, Shakia Ballard, and James Skrill, Eberhardt Jr., and also would love to thank our sponsor, Fifth Third Bank, for their support with these town halls. We hope that you join us next time. Again, if you want to find out more about New Detroit, our initiatives, or more of our work, or to donate to New Detroit, you can visit us online at newdetroit.org. Thank you all again for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peace.